Hello, if you're new here, my name is Avery, and today I'm going to tell you how much I have invested, saved, and my total debt at 26 years old. Essentially, I'm giving you my net worth at 26. I got this idea from the creator Zoe Pritchard on YouTube, so definitely check out her channel if you have not heard of her. I'll leave a link down below to the video that she has done about this. In this video, I'm going to give you context about my financial history, how I grew up a bit, the income that I've made since my first job at 2014 to my current job now in 2024. And I'm also going to tell you a little bit about major rent and expenses I've had before I tell you the exact amounts. So if you don't care about any of that and you just want to know the numbers, definitely use the chapters in this video to skip around. But otherwise, I'd love it if you would subscribe and like this video if you get anything out of it at all, because that really helps support my channel. Okay, let's get into it. I want to give you a little bit of history and context about my life and where I've come from so you have an understanding of what I've been working with in order to get to this point. I have been financially independent from my parents since I was 18 years old. And how I define this is all of my expenses have been the responsibility of me, aside from my health insurance. I was on my dad's health plan until I was 26, which I turned 26 this year. I ended up moving to my own health plan at that point. So although he was paying the medical premiums from his paychecks, I was responsible for any of the out-of-pocket expenses. So like co-pays, prescriptions, medical bills, all of that became my financial responsibility. And I have had a lot of medical expenses over the years because I do manage multiple chronic conditions. The financial responsibility of college was mine alone. So what this means is I ended up paying for college through a combination of scholarships, grants, and loans. And federal work study, so which is just a financial federal aid program where you get you have to work for it, so it's not money you get paid up front. It's just money that you can get on the back end essentially for living expenses if you work a federal work study job. I attended college from 2016 to 2020, so I graduated in the middle of a lot of turmoil on the entire planet, but I studied political science and gender studies with a creative writing minor. I want to give you a little bit of context on what my rent has been. So when I was living on campus the first 2 years of college, I didn't have a rent per se. It was just the cost of living in a dorm, and all of that was paid up front through my financial aid. So a combination of scholarships, grants, and loans. When I moved off campus my junior year, I ended up taking on a rent of $645 a month, and this included utilities and internet. And again, for the most part, I paid that with my financial aid refund. In my senior year, my rent increased to $670 a month. Internet was still included, but utilities ended up being my responsibility, so they ended up billing us for utilities separately, essentially. So my off-campus apartments, I ended up living in a studio alone, but my first apartment after college, I lived with a roommate in a townhome, and I paid $615 a month for my share plus utilities. I live in Ohio, so the cost of living might vary greatly depending on where you're from. I lived in that townhome for 1 year, and I ended up moving into my own apartment again. This time it was a 1-bedroom apartment, and my first year in this apartment, I paid $805 a month plus utilities, and then after that, I believe it was $833 a month plus utilities. Now I've been living with my fiance for the past year and a half, and my share of rent is $672.50 a month, and this is inclusive of utilities again. So for the most part, I've done a relatively good job of keeping my rent stable from about 2018 to 2024, aside from those few years where I lived in that $800 a month apartment. And then the only other context I want to give you, or I feel like I need to give you, is I ended up having a car loan in 2020. I bought a 2017 Volkswagen Jetta used, and I put down $6,000 for this for a down payment, and I ended up financing about $11,000. Through a combination of my jobs that I was working at the time, which I will give you an income overview next, I ended up paying that car loan off in exactly 1 year. Before we get into the value of my current accounts, I want to talk a little bit about my income history and what kind of jobs I've worked so you have an understanding of how much money I've ultimately had to work with over the years to get to the point where I'm at now. In 2014, I was 16 years old and I started my first job working at a bakery. I made $7.95 an hour and I worked about 10 to 15 hours a week after school during the school year, and then during the summer I worked about 15 to 20 hours a week. So I did that for 2 years until I went to college. From 2016 to 2020, I had a variety of jobs at my university, and the very first job I worked, I made $8.50 an hour working for a dining hall as a cashier. I only did that for about a semester, and I ended up switching over to the library and working there for the rest of my college career. But I was making $8.25 an hour at the beginning, and then by the time I graduated, I was making about $8.75 an hour. So I got a slight increase over time, but it wasn't too much. This job was only during the school year, and for me, I only went autumn and spring, and I worked about 10 to 15 hours a week at the library. My sophomore year, I took on a second job at the university working as an office assistant in a residence hall, and I was making, I believe it was also $8.25 an hour. I ended up working about 10 to 15 hours there as well. So I ended up on average during my sophomore year between the library and the residence hall working about 20 to 25 hours a week. We had a limit where you could not work more than 28 hours combined. My library job was Federal Work Study, which is a financial aid program that you have access to if you are lower income during college. Depending on your school, you might be offered financial aid. So just so you're aware, there were hourly limits on how much I could work each week. My junior year, I moved off campus, so I no longer worked as an office assistant at the residence hall because I no longer lived there. I ended up continuing to work at the library for about $8.50 an hour at this time. This was 2018 to 2019. And I did not have any other jobs at this point, essentially. I did do an internship at one point, just a political internship, but that was unpaid. And I did that like my spring semester, junior year, and I made $0 an hour, and I went about 8 hours a week. The summer before my senior year, I ended up getting another job working for my university in the financial services department, essentially, and I did call center work there, and they offered me $9.50 an hour. That summertime, you were allowed to work more hours if you weren't currently enrolled. These were all student positions. So that summer, I probably worked on average about 25 to 35 hours a week. I was not working at the library at the time, so my income at that time was just $9.50 an hour at this call center job for my university. After that, 2020 hit. We know what happened there. That was also the year I graduated, though, so all of these student positions I had, I no longer was allowed to work. So I needed to get a job, and with what happened in 2020, a lot of people that had lost their jobs had unemployment available to them. Because of the nature of my role, I ended up actually keeping my financial services job a little bit until July. So I graduated in May and they let me work there until July. I just ended up working from home because it was such an important role for the university that they couldn't necessarily just get rid of the student workers. Which, in hindsight, I'm happy that I ended up working that because I feel like I'm still doing better than a lot of my peers that graduated in that time. But at the time, I remember being a bit miffed by it because I was not getting access to like the expanded unemployment benefits. Because at the time, unemployment would have paid me more than what I was making because I was making $9.50 an hour. It's hard to conceptualize now because I feel like a lot of these kind of like entry-level jobs, the base pay has gone up quite a bit. But at the time, I was making $9.50 an hour. So in July, I had to figure out what to do. I was moving to my first apartment, no longer related to my college career. So I was moving away from the campus neighborhood, and I no longer had financial aid to help me with the cost of paying for my living expenses. So I ended up taking a temporary job or a seasonal job as a call center rep for a educational like services company. It was a private employer, and I was getting paid $16 an hour, and I was getting paid weekly. There was no benefits with that, but I was working full time. I hated that job, so as soon as possible I got a different job, and this time it was a full-time job working as a call center rep for a retirement services company, and I was making $19.59 an hour, which came out to about $40,747 a year. And I remember feeling like so wealthy when I got that pay. I remember being like very proud that I was breaking $40,000 a year. And this was in the end of 2020, start of 2021. I honestly did not want to be in call centers. I really do not like that kind of work, and it's just not well suited for me. So in 2021, I was able to break free of the call centers. I ended up going back to the university in a full-time position, working in financial services, but on the back end, so more in the processing side. So in 2021, I did take a pay cut to go to this position, and I ended up making $18.25 an hour, which comes out to less than $40,000 a year. I'll put the number on the screen. During that time, after a few months of working there, I ended up picking up a part-time job at a restaurant, working on Friday nights and on Saturdays, just because I had a car loan at the time that I really wanted to pay off. And I knew I could do it quicker if I had a second job. So for the restaurant, I worked about 8 to 10 hours a week, and it was a base pay plus a tip share. So I ended up getting about $15 to $16 an hour on average from that role. Something important that I should mention is during my college career on the summertime, most of the summers, I ended up going back to the bakery into my hometown. And at one point I was making about $11 an hour. And then as I got further into my college career, I was no longer going back in the summertime, but I was working what I'll call contingent, and I would get paid a daily rate, and it was anywhere from about $60 a day to $175 a day. So that really did help with my financial goals and my income. And this happened between 2016 and then it ended in 2023. And when I say contingent, this mostly just meant holidays and some popular weekends at the bakery, so it really was not a consistent income. So back to my full-time job in financial processing, I ended up working in that position, which was just their entry-level staff assistant role, from 2021 through the end of 2022. I did get one pay increase at the time. They gave me a market adjustment essentially, so they updated my pay to about $19.57 an hour. So keep in mind, I still was not making as much as my job at the retirement services, my first full-time permanent job, but I was a lot happier here because I did not have to be on the phones all day. At the end of 2022, I got a promotion at this job, so I was no longer a staff assistant. I was more of they called it a program consultant, but I guess program coordinator would also be a comparable title. And I ended up switching to salary, and I was making $51,000 a year, and I was working on average 40 to 50 hours a week. Definitely sometimes with the amount of hours I was working, it essentially would just cut my effective hourly rate. That's why I'm not calculating an hourly rate. I just ended up being on an annual basis $51,000. In 2023, I got a small pay increase at this job, and I ended up making $52,275 a year. In 2024, and this brings us to our present time period, I work my current role, which is a business analyst for a program manager, essentially. Not necessarily in financial services anymore, but it is in something related to my previous job. It's transferable, essentially. But I was looking for something new. I found this role, and it pays me $28.73 an hour, which comes out to just under $60,000 a year. So between 2014, I was making $7.95 an hour part-time, and now in 2024, 10 years later, I'm making $28.73 an hour, and this is full-time. I'm honestly very happy with this. I know for some people they might not consider this like that impressive, but for me and my family history, like I come from a family that has not had a lot of money. For the most part, my parents haven't even made $60,000 through most of their adulthood. So being able to get to that at a younger age is definitely something I know that I'm proud of and my family is proud of, especially since I don't work in manual labor, any sort of roles like that. And because I went to college, I was a first generation college student. And I also feel like the most important context I can give you as well is, aside from the restaurant and the bakery, which were part-time roles for me, all of the rest of my positions have been in essentially public service. So if you work for any sort of public agency or public entity, you know that your salaries are lower on average compared to your counterparts. But of course, what tends to make up for it is the benefits. For example, I'm very happy with the health insurance I get through my employer, and I know if I was in private employment, that would not be as good of health insurance and I would pay more for it. And for someone like me who has a lot of chronic conditions that they manage, it definitely makes more sense to be in public employment, at least for now, but I reserve the right to change my mind in the future. Yeah, so that is my income overview, just to give you context. So I began tracking my net worth in August of 2021. So I'm going to tell you what my net worth was then and now what my net worth is now in December of 2024. In August of 2021, I had $6,953.01 in cash. I had $5,669 in my pension account, so I've been paying into that since my first job at a university. I had just started my Roth IRA, and I only had $360.60 in there. And then my 457B, which is a supplemental retirement account for, I believe, public workers or nonprofit workers, I had $194.38 in there. And then as far as other assets went, I did have a car that was valued at about $15,000 at the time. For my liabilities, I had two liabilities. The first one was my student loans. So I did end up taking out about $20,000 in student loans. By the time I graduated in 2020, the interest had made that increase to $22,074.68. That is how much I had in student loans at the time in August of 2021. I also still had my car loan at the time, and I owed about $5,746.19. So total assets, that would be my car, my cash on hand, the pension account that I had, my Roth IRA, my 457B. In August of 2021, I had $28,177.43. But since I had a relatively significant high liabilities in relation to that, with the $22,000 in student loans and the $5,700 in my car, my total liabilities at the time were $27,820.87. This made my net worth at the time $356.56. So I did have a positive net worth, but just barely. I should also mention that I at no point have had credit card debt. I have been lucky in that regard that I have not had to pay off credit card debt. I just make my payments in full every month. I've always been a bit of a saver rather than a spender. I'm not really sure why necessarily. It's just how I've kind of naturally been since my first job in high school, and I've continued to be that way 10 years later. Okay, as of today, let's talk about how much I have in assets and how much I have in liabilities. In December of 2024, the value of my car has dropped down to $8,500. So it did decrease between 2021 and now $6,500, which I am fine with because ultimately I am tracking the value of my car and my net worth, but it's not what I necessarily can cash out or have access to. And for me, my car is something I plan on keeping for a very long time. So it makes sense that it would decrease over time. For cash, I have increased the amount of cash I have on hand to $15,912.54 as of today, December 29th, 2024, which means the total amount I have in the bank in liquid cash has increased $8,959.53. For my pension account, I have continued to work in pension eligible, like public pension eligible employment. And when you hit the 5-year mark in pension employment, you end up getting what's called an additional match. So almost 2 years ago now, I hit the 5-year mark, which all of this is to say my pension account has increased significantly to $29,786. So as of today, I am just under $30,000, which I'm very happy about. This represents an increase in this account of $24,116.56. My Roth IRA is another account I'm pretty proud of. As of today, I have $17,594 in this account. So over the past 3 years, this account value has increased in $17,233. I have not been maxing out this Roth IRA. I do want to do this in 2025, but other than 1 year, I have not been able to max this out. But regardless, I'm still very happy with the progress that I've made in just 3 years. My last asset or investment account is my 457B. So this account has actually decreased in value to $124.68, which means I've lost $69.70. The reasoning for this is actually at one point I ended up closing my 457B, and it wasn't until my new job that I got in July of this year that I end up reopening it. So I basically have started over in this account. I contribute $25 every paycheck into this account, and then each July it'll increase by $30. So essentially it's just literally a supplemental retirement account. So my total assets are now $71,917.22, which represents an increase of $43,739.79. For my liabilities or my debt, I no longer have a car loan. I ended up paying that off in October of 2021. So the value of that has gone down to zero, or how much I owe on that is $0. And then for my student loans, I have been able to pay off about $3,493 of these, making my current balance on my debt $18,581, which represents a decrease in debt of $9,239.87. So taking my total assets as of today, $71,917.22, and subtracting out my total liabilities of $18,581, I get to a total net worth of $53,336.22. This represents an increase of almost $53,000 in the past 3 years. And what I really like about that is most of that increase in my net worth has come from increasing my investments, which since I am young, that is primarily my focus. I know for some people, they might want to focus on paying off the student loans as quickly as possible, but as soon as I paid off my car loan, my focus kind of shifted to putting as much money as I can while I'm still young into my retirement accounts, because ultimately, if I give it enough time to increase, get interest, compound investing, I will be in a better place than necessarily taking a few years to pay off my student loans and then starting to work on my retirement account. So I'm working on both of those simultaneously, paying off debt and increasing my investments, but my primary focus is increasing my investments as of now. And now let's talk about the year-over-year change in my net worth. And I'm going to give this in a broader overview. For 2021, since I don't have a full tracking year, we're just going to start with 2022. So at the end of 2022, my net worth was $24,542.39. And this represents an increase of $14,644.48. The primary reason for this significant increase is I ended up getting to the 5-year mark in the retirement system. So I ended up getting a large bump in the value of my pension account. This represents assets of $46,996.19 minus debts of $22,453.80. In 2023, my net worth increased significantly again. By the end of 2023, I had a net worth of $35,732.56. And this represents assets of about $57,500 minus debts of about $21,750, which total increase in my net worth was $13,687.62 that year. And this now brings us to present time. So at the end of this year, 2024, we already talked about what my total net worth is, but the change year over year for this year was a positive $14,799.86. Like I mentioned, I am very happy with this. I'm just very proud of how far I've come and how much I've kind of done it alone. As far as handling college, figuring out my job and my career, and I'm very proud of the progress that I've made. If you want to see how my net worth continues to increase, hit the subscribe button and stick around because I'm going to start posting monthly updates. If you want to track your net worth, what you need to do is first add up all of your assets. So this would be any money that you have on hand, any investments that you have, anything that has a value to it. So like a car or the price or value of your home, your retirement accounts, add all of that up to see what your total assets are. And then you want to subtract out any liabilities. So this is any money that you owe. Or any money that you have that's debt. So if you have credit card debt, you want to subtract that out. If you have a mortgage loan, subtract that out. Car loan, any student loans, any of those, that you would subtract out your liabilities to determine what your net worth is. I also want to mention that your net worth does not equal what your worth is as a human being. It's ultimately just a way to track your financial progress and see where you're at. But it doesn't determine the value that you have as a person. So don't get too hung up on it if it's not as high as you want it to be, or if you think that you don't have a good net worth. I feel like what I showed today is that as long as you keep increasing your income and working on your savings investments while paying off debt, you are always going to be trending pretty much in the right direction each time. But now I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments how you are doing with your net worth. If you have made any progress on it, like have you paid off any big debts this year or made any big investments? I would love to hear from you in the comments below. If you got anything at all out of this video, go ahead and hit the like button because it really supports my channel. Thank you so much. I will see you all in the next one. Bye now.